Welcome, everybody, to a CFO's perspective on financial planning and analysis with James Broadley. James Broadley is a transformation leader who has 40 years of experience in the finance world, 38 of those in the consumer product industry, working for the likes of Diageo and Mars. He has lived and worked all over the world with a wide range of companies, from startups to sorry about that. From startups to multinational Fortune 500s. He has experience in finance, FP&A, IT, HR, and sales and marketing, to name a few. He has held the role of CFO since 1998, so has a wealth of experience to share with us. Thanks for joining us today, James.
Thank you, James.
So just before we jump into the questions, what I'm going to do is going to take you through just a quick introduction of FP&A strategy. So FP&A strategy, we've been around since 2012. We have about 10 consultants. We operate in the US and the UK, and we really take a very pragmatic approach to looking at how do we help companies accelerate that transformation. We work in industries in high tech, food and beverage, and retail. And our vision is to leverage technology to combine strategy, business, and data to create empowered teams. We really, some of the services we provide, we've helped companies, design and look at how they want to do their transformation and become more digital. Technology integration. We work with platforms such as Anaplan and Adaptive, as well as using Power BI and data modeling in Excel, DAX, M, and SQL. We also offer industrial insights and getting people up to speed with FP&A and understanding kind of where their gaps are in the FP&A team. And just wanted to kind of, if anybody wanted to have a demo and kind of understand kind of what options there are out there, please give us a call. So I'm going to just turn that off. Great. So James, the role of the CFO. I mean, you've been a CFO for a number of years now. I think I count 25 of them. How have you seen that evolve over time? And as a second question to that, what impact has that had on the FP&A organization as a whole?
Well, let me just start off by saying that, I mean, apart from the kind of the larger organizations that I've worked for, I've also worked for some mid-size and smaller companies, so a kind of a different range. And I think it really depends a lot on the company that you're working with and the extent of their geography. Obviously, if they're just localized in one area, it's one thing. If you're spread out across different states, or if you're spread out geographically, internationally, global, like Mars was or is, then that has a different connotation on the CFO role, I think. It has changed. It is changing, and I think is becoming a lot more demanding of a role. It's increasingly shifting from the functional, traditional accounting kind of role into one of strategy and insight. And I think that more and more CFOs are being challenged with not only being the steward and operator, but more of a strategist and a catalyst, and hence transformation expert in companies. And I think they're having to adapt their skill set to make sure that they understand what is really being demanded in the corporate environment, from analytical and developing collaboration type skills, in addition to embracing leading technology, transformation within the organizations. And I'm not just talking about the finance and traditional accounting side. I'm talking about the totality of the organization, including production efficiency and whatever type of company, whether it's a service-related company or a manufacturing company. Like mainly, I've been working in the manufacturing space pretty much most of my life, and mainly in the food and beverage space. And I've definitely seen significant changes on the demands of the CFO. I remember when when I first started with Diageo many years ago, that was pre-spreadsheets. And so we were having to write every single product and product size and every aspect pertaining to that product on large pieces of paper, which were basically stapled together, and doing quarterly forecasts and annual budgets in that manner. Obviously, as things like Lotus 1, 2, 3 came along, and ultimately Excel and so on and so forth, it made our lives a lot more efficient. But that's still, really early days of FP&A, and I think that not only the accounting side, which was really the historical look back aspect, is obviously a very key functional role of the CFO, but the FP&A being the forward-looking side is really where the CFO was being driven to pay more attention to where the business was going. And I think the tool sets that we have at our disposal today have been significant improvements over years ago. I mean, I remember I've always been keen on the use of technology, and so I've made it my practice to make sure that our business was paperless, was workflow oriented, and streamlined the whole accounts receivable and payable areas of things. Made sure that the board and senior management were involved and could understand a lot of the graphics and analytics that were being presented to them. And these were things that, in the old days were very basic sort of histogram type charts. And whereas today you're getting very dynamic charts that, if you're using something like Power BI or something like that, you can do things and change things and look at things on the fly, which a few years ago weren't available. So, more and more people are getting into predictive analytics, are getting into cognitive analytics, and I think that this makes the CFO's life even more interesting and challenging. I think CFOs are getting more involved today in social media activity, in cybersecurity, in aspects like logistics, corporate branding, and so on. And more and more functions are, as a result, tending to report into the CFO, as opposed to, traditionally sort of 20, 25 years ago, it was normally just basically the accounting, HR, risk management, that kind of thing that would typically report into the CFO. But I think the FP&A team, to take the second part of your question, is now becoming more important. It isn't one person with an Excel spreadsheet trying to, put forward the operating plan and or the regular updates to forecasts and so on. I think now you're looking at a much more collaborative team of people that are providing information from the front end of the business as to, what the customers are doing, what the market's doing, what the salespeople are saying, and right through the whole company. And of course, you're looking at it from a very integrated set of forecasting tools to be able to manage the what ifs that people are going to be asking of the CFO. So I hope that kind of
No,
a rambling answer gave you some sort of insight into the fact that, yeah, I've seen quite a few changes over time.
Yeah, I mean, you talk a little bit about strategy and getting involved in the strategy. How do you have you experienced that strategy playing a role in sort of the role of the CFO, and how does the CFO kind of get ahead of the strategy?
Well, I think there again, I'm speaking from my own personal experience. I think the CFO being the right hand person to support the CEO is really being charged with driving a lot of that strategy and helping the kind of leadership team get together, to collaborate together, to get the kind of information that the business needs in a very granular sense, right up to sort of holistic view of life. And I think it's really the CFO's job to architect that and to drive that forward for the CEO. And I think the CEO is leaning heavily on the CFO to make some of these things happen.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. I think, the CFO seems to be the person that is involved in, the organization as a whole, similar to the CEO, and really kind of bringing that finance leadership to bear on kind of all of the strategic objectives. You also, so part of that question was also about the role of the financial planning team as well. How have you seen that change in your experience over time? And obviously, before we were doing paper, but and then becoming digital.
I
But
think
how have you seen that role change?
they really rely on good systems, well-designed systems, to really mine data, big data, to be able to deliver the sort of analytics and information that the business requires. And I think that, a lot of it, depending on how people do their annual budgets or their monthly forecasts or quarterly reforecasts or whatever it is that they choose to do, the FP&A team is having to come up with the answers in a very quick turnaround way. And I think that in the past, we would put forward like scenarios, and because we didn't have the tool sets in those days to be able to turn things around that quickly, we would come up with 4 or 5 scenarios. And so if you go this way, this is what it could look like. If you look at this way, it could look like that. If you take a 10%, downfall, it could look like this, and so on and so forth, because we didn't have the ability to do on the cuff what ifs. And so the way that our systems were designed, you could do top down, but bottom up was different. So if you wanted to change something in production or add a new product, well, we'll get back to you in a day or two. You know what I mean? Whereas today, I think that isn't really acceptable anymore. And I think that today, if you're sitting at a board meeting or in a strategic management meeting, people are going to want answers almost instantaneously. And so you have to be able to design the top-down, bottom-up type scenarios in a way that you can ask what if scenarios at anywhere within the corporation and be able to come up with an answer pretty quickly. And I think that that's where the FP&A team today it's important for them to have the tool set to be able to be able to play that game.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, I think that they're becoming more and more important. I think the historical accounting side is always going to have to be there from an audit and a tax perspective, but the more important thing for businesses today is the looking forward, whether it's looking forward a month, 3 months, a year, 5 years, um, whatever, you know, projections you can do that the business can have some kind of reliance on. And I think that's the other thing. I think that, you know, I think being a meteorologist in maybe San Diego is probably not as hard a job as being a meteorologist in the country of Ireland. And on the one hand, it's easy because in San Diego it's going to be sunny today and tomorrow and the next day, and in Ireland it's going to rain today, the next day, and the next day. So that's common, but the fluctuations that they're having to deal with, it to me is rather like the FP&A role. Whatever you put out there, the chances are it's going to be wrong because of the forecasting nature of things and what's ever going on in the marketplace and so on and so forth. But you know, at the same time, you want to be as close to giving people a degree of comfort that the business can deal with.
No, that sounds great. So, if you're looking at kind of your experience of looking at FP&A teams and the teams that you've worked with in the past, what would you consider as kind of best in class that kind of help you support you in your CFO role?
Um, I think I think there again it comes down to um, whether you have a team approach here, because I think really today the businesses need a competent team of FP&A people, and not just be reliant on one person for obvious reasons, because that person takes vacations, can get sick, and so on and so forth. But also, I think that the complexity today and the level of detail that people are wanting to get into from a point of forecasting out is a lot more than just one person could cope with. And also looking at the different aspects of a, let's say, a consumer product company. You know, you've got what's going on in the front end, the sales and your competitors and your marketplace and so on and so forth. And pricing can make a big deal depending on the type of business that you're in. Um, but also you've got the pipeline flowing through to operations and logistics and the supply chain and so on. And so you need a team of people that can take that information and make it all happen in a cohesive way, and support those systems in a cohesive way. And so the more people are getting information in a live, everyday sense is important. I was kind of, as my role as a CFO, I kind of pictured myself as the air traffic controller of the business, and you know, you'd have a very large screen with multiple visions of the company as to what it was going on, and rather like looking at the stock market, you were looking at various aspects of your business because they're all interacting in a very dynamic way, as opposed to looking at a printout and then updating that printout once a week or once a month or whatever it was. I'm looking at it more from a dynamic point of view, because you really don't want to crash and burn. You want to be able to see that there's something on the tarmac before you decide to land the next plane. And the same way, it needs to be a lot more dynamic. And I think that's where the team, the FP&A team, becomes really valuable to the business. Is being able to come up with this new kind of bit of information that I didn't tell you yesterday, but it's just surfaced because of this, you know, and that's really important to the business today.
Right. I mean, you talked about some of those key measures. What were the key types of key measures that you were looking at when you were kind of looking and trying to manage your business on a more kind of time?
We had obviously the normal financial kind of ratios and analysis from the profitability and the relationship to cash and debt and so on and so forth. But we also had obviously KPIs that were identified for each part of the business that were being measured and tracked through our daily Power BI apps that we had. And we had created lots of apps to support various aspects of the business, whether it's looking at a packaging line or the packaging hall with multiple lines on it, knowing what was going on every single moment of the day, or kind of holistically from a management perspective, how they were doing against target and objectives and so on and so forth. So I think that the FP&A team are dialed into what is going on in the business on a day-to-day basis, and they are constantly involved in the meetings that take place, providing their insight to the business as to how to improve, how to track, if there's some kind of data error, how to deal with that data error, and so on. I think the actual partnering, if you will, of the FP&A team was very important, because I don't want people sitting in front of a computer all day long. I want them to be out and about with operations, with the sales guys and so on and so forth. So they really are providing a support mechanism, not only gleaning what is happening and feeding it back into their database, but also being able to provide important information to their particular business partners. So they need to have a deep understanding of the business. They need to be able to present complex information in a simple and clear way to the business, ask the right questions, challenge assumptions, and make sure that the data that they're presenting has been validated and is supported, and they can actually stand the test of time.
Yeah, so some of the research that we've been doing, we're seeing that FP&A is spending at least, a large percentage, almost half of their time on data validation and data collection. Do you see that in your businesses, and how did you guys solve for that problem?
Yeah, I think that was always an issue, to be honest. And I think we found that in our operations side, it was more predictable, because we knew what the ins were, we knew what the outs were, and we knew what was capable of being produced every day. And so we were tracking the performance very closely on that. We could measure the ins and the outs, but we also knew that they should be meeting these kind of targets throughout the day. And so therefore people needed to explain if there was machine breakdowns or some other reason as to why we weren't able to meet those production requirements, that we could understand that and then take that into account as we move forward, so we would make sure that we didn't short customers. I think the more difficult thing for us was at the front end of the business, which was really knowing what was going to happen to our customers, and we had domestic as well as international customers, and so it was more difficult to get information from our international customers in a timely fashion. And apart from just looking at their kind of historical order bank, that wasn't really what we were looking for. We were really looking for, well, how do you see yourselves growing your business with this, that, and the other? And that was the bit of information that I think was more difficult for us to get back. And also, same thing, if you're dealing domestically and you're dealing like we were with large chain stores and so on, it's very difficult to get information from, you know, the Walmarts and the Safeways and people like that of this world. They're only going to provide you with basic information that they are willing to share. So I think that the front end of the business, if there was a way in our world of gleaning more accurate, up to date information, as opposed to just modeling what the historical was against our growth forecast for the year. And that's the area that you really don't want surprises. And so it was very difficult to not only get accurate, up-to-date information to feed into the forecast, but at the end of the day, if things went south, it was more likely to come from the front end than the back end, because the back end was more predictable.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. So what are some of the common mistakes that you've seen FP&A teams do or make, and how do you go about correcting them?
Well, that there again, I think is largely dependent on what type of software they're using. And I think I go back to Excel because I think a lot of people are still using Excel as their primary source of planning and forecasting and things like that. And I think the errors that we have definitely experienced in the past is, for example, when you're doing an annual budget, and all of a sudden you're bringing in new line items, new product items, and some of them behave in a certain way and some of them behave in a different way, and so on and so forth. And then you find that somebody was copy pasting down line items from previous because there was a model there that they would follow, and they just update with the relevant information or the sizes or the, whatever the things that were driving that new product, and suddenly realized that, yeah, it didn't work like that at all. The pricing wasn't in the same way. The way that product behaved was totally different. And so now you've got glaring errors which you don't necessarily see at budget time, because the numbers are dwarfed by some of the other products that you've got that are more established. You only see it as you move through the year, and you suddenly say, oh my God, why? How did we do that? And then you find out that it was actually a system error, that somebody had copy pasted something that was ridiculous. And so those are the kind of things that have happened and do happen in Excel. And things like updating Excel, on a rolling basis, if you haven't really designed it properly, can cause systematic errors and nightmares for, having to explain to the board or management team why you made an error. I think there again, it depends on the level of detail that people get into in terms of the forecasting. I can understand forecasting each product because they behave or can behave in a different way. There are different sizes, they do different things, and so on and so forth. But I think there again that there needs to be a kind of an 80-20 kind of thinking, that you are going to be wrong at the end of the day because of the nature of what you're trying to do, and the nature of the projection, the time scale that you're projecting out. If you're doing a 1-year budget, that's one thing. If you're doing a 5-year budget, you're likely to be even further out off of your estimation. So I think that there needs to be a happy medium that the business signs off on in terms of the level of detail. You really don't want to be counting the number of staples in your forecast. It's probably not that important unless you're in the staple business, I guess. But for a normal consumer product company, I think you need to get down to a level that is forecastable, but not only forecastable, but accountable. So when you're actually going back and comparing against actuals, you have the ability to compare against an actual.
All right. No, that sounds good. So Just for everybody that's listening on the call, if there are any questions that you want to ask James, feel free to add them into the chat in LinkedIn. Those will appear, and we can definitely ask them. We'll also have time at the end of the session for any questions. Again, just add them into the chat. So, from your experience, what would you consider sort of the best practices for FP&A teams? If somebody's starting out and you've starting out in a new team, what would you recommend for those teams as best practices?
Um, they need to be on the management team, I think, because I think that this is very important to the business as a role. The business is relying on where we're going, not where we've been. And so we need to have at least the head of the FPA team on the senior management team. And so that person is conversing at the management level and knows what uh, is being demanded of the business, and can translate that directly to the team and say, okay, fine, here are our marching orders. We need to know that this is coming down the horizon. We haven't got it in our plan, but it's likely to happen. It could be a merger and acquisition. It could be a new product. It could be a new customer. It could be somebody going bankrupt. It could be a lot of different things that they're not necessarily going to know about if they're not part of that executive team. And I think that's important. So valuable insights and knowledge of what's going on at the management and the business level is important. They need to think about how frequently to update their forecasts. Do they do kind of rolling forecasts? Do they do like a monthly update? Do they do 445? Do they do, how is it that they're going to be updating these forecasts? And to what level do they do it? Do they do it to the same level as the operating plan, or they're just doing a mini version? So I think they need to work closely with the CFO and the CEO to make sure that there is a good understanding as to what the expectation is at the senior level as to these outcomes and how frequently these things need to be updated. So that's important, and being able to provide guidance to the business. So this is what we're seeing, and it may or may not happen, but just not want to bring it to your attention. So, not just coming up with problems, but coming up with solutions to deal with the problem if that problem were to arise, and giving people an estimate as to how, is this a 90% certainty that this is going to happen, or is it a 5% certainty that it's going to happen? Giving people an idea of the risk side of things. So that's important. They need to be using the tools, the technological tools that are available today. Working with, I always like to know what other people are doing. In the old days, and it isn't necessarily applicable today, but in the old days, I always used to, Boeing used to be the leader of a lot of what was going on in the world in terms of technology and forecasting and so on and so forth. And I would always say, well, what the hell are Boeing doing? And because if Boeing are going in that kind of direction, maybe we need to get a good idea of what these guys are doing. And I think that, depending on the type of business you're in, it's always good to look over your shoulder and go to some conferences every now and again, an FP&A conference, and find out what other people are doing and what software they're using and why they're using it, and whether it's something that you could use, or, I think that's really important for an FP&A team. I think, they need to be very attached to the culture of the business, and bring that through their FP&A environment as well. I think that it's the culture of the business that they start going out on a limb, and it doesn't fit with what the business is likely to do or accept, then that could be a problem. They're going off their own agenda as opposed to what the business really is looking for. So I think that those are kind of some key things. Providing guidance, valuable insights to the business in a timely fashion, are the things that really the CEO would be looking for.
No, that sounds great. Yeah, so I think you talked a little bit about kind of transformation in all of that. We talk about like digital transformation, moving from paper to Excel, and now to a lot of the solutions that are available. Can you share some of your success stories and some of the learnings that you've had as you've tried to transform a finance organization?
Yeah, I kind of looked at I always talk about finance transformation, but then I thought I better look at a definition of the thing, because you kind of talk about it in general terms. So a definition that I looked at was the finance transformation is the combination of processes, systems, and organizational change across a business, implemented through new technologies, training, and analysis. So it's important that this transformation is going to drive the strategic ambitions of the company. And so they're going to do it through a combination of processes. We're going to change this. We're going to make it better. We're going to eliminate this, or systems and organizational change in the business. And most people don't like change. In fact, what they hate is the transitional aspect of change. I think, if you talk about it and, hey, we're thinking of doing that, people get uncomfortable with a lot of that kind of stuff. They're more happy with, okay, this is where we're going to go. We're going to go north. And so, fine. Okay, you made a decision. I'm okay with that, But I think that the transformation, first of all, you hear people say, well, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Well, yeah, well, it depends on what world you're in and who you're competing with, and so on and so forth. And I think that one of the best examples that I can think of off the top of my head is the way that the auto industry has moved rapidly towards electric vehicles. And it took one guy, I'm going to call him Musk, but one guy to produce a vehicle that was radically different in so many different ways, and to come up with an architecture that allowed that vehicle to roll out across the country in a way that wasn't supported in those days. We only had gas pumps. And so then, of course, once the other people started to get into that, it fueled a radical change in Detroit in terms of everybody needed to now develop electric vehicles. And not only in Detroit, but obviously in Japan and everywhere else in Germany, everybody now is producing electric vehicles, and of every description. And now with that, it's actually, I don't have an electric vehicle because I live in boondocks, and I'd run out of gas before I got anywhere. But I think that the transformation that you can see even inside these vehicles, what the electric engineering is doing is, I think, amazing, really amazing. It's not just what the car looks like and how you open the doors. and how the doors open and all this kind of thing. But it's everything that's going inside ergonomically inside that vehicle, and how these things are now moving, and getting into cars that are driverless vehicles, and trucks that are going, the 18-wheelers that are driving across the country now. I was in Phoenix the other day, and the Waymo cars that have been going there for 3 or 4 years now, expanding their thing with no driver in there. So you call Waymo just like an Uber app, and a driverless Jaguar arrives and picks you up and takes you wherever you want to go. And so I think things are changing really rapidly through that kind of thinking, and through things like artificial intelligence and robotics and so on and so forth. And I think that what's going to happen in the next 10 years, I think it's going to be amazing. I think if you look at your smartphone, I mean, we've only had a smartphone for 12 or 13 years, and I'm sure that Steve Jobs couldn't imagine what he had created, because he was looking at music and telephony, and then they stuck a camera inside it and so on and so forth. But if you think about how everybody uses their own phones today, even in a relatively short time period from when these things were first invented, and what the next 10 years or 15, 20 years are going to look like for people like FP&A, what sort of tools are they going to be using to get the kind of information? And I think it's going to be really interesting to see. The difficulty is going to be for Neanderthals like myself to be able to keep up with what is going on. That's the frightening side of things. But I'm glad I'm retired now. Don't have that problem.
Yeah. Well, that sounds good. I mean, it's a great example that you give of just like disruption and things like that. I mean, are you in your, the things that you were doing? Did you do any big finance transformation projects, and were there like key learnings?
Yeah, I think that without getting into any of the details, I was brought in as a transformation agent, and we during that time really moved the whole business out of being, what was the largest dairy business in the world into, almonds. And so the whole infrastructure of the business changed from being a cost overhead for all the land to actually feed all the cattle that we had, and the value of the land associated with that feed production, as compared to having a permanent crop in place, is just a game changer. And I think that that's what people in California particularly have in the ag space. They have options because of the value of land with water has gone up dramatically. And so it's what use do you put to that? Down in LA, in Chino Hills area, that all used to be cattle. That all used to be dairy cattle around there. And I think there's only one dairy there now. But that's all gone. They've moved the cows out. And that's now residential and restaurants and shopping centers and all sorts of things. But that used to be cow country, And so I think there are options that people are looking at, and you transform your business. I remember I grew up in Rhodesia, which is Zimbabwe. And I remember when we had sanctions imposed back in the 70s, farmers in those days, we used to be known as the breadbasket of Africa. Farmers were growing cotton and wheat and tobacco and so on and so forth. Well, obviously, tobacco has changed, as we all know, considerably. But with sanctions being imposed on that country, we found that the kind of crops that people were producing on their farms had to change because they weren't getting the value from this. So they started farming crocodiles and farming ostriches and farming all sorts of other crops that were just unimaginable in those old days, in order to get the value and to stay ahead and to be competitive in the world.
Yeah, that's great. You mentioned a little bit about software. What experience do you have with software? And obviously, you've seen a lot of change over your career.
Yeah,
To get your thoughts on that.
you know, during the last sort of 15 years, I really looked for a software solution that was going to fit the businesses that I was working for, in a flexible, dynamic way. And I tried various different packages, to call them more than just like Excel. But to be honest, I think that the training that people have in Excel, kind of, they are reluctant to move away to learning a new package that might have restrictions on the business as to what they can do. And so I've tried various different things, and and some of these packages work really well in other companies, but they didn't necessarily, for whatever reason, work well for us. And I'm including things like Data Rails, OnPlan, Vena, Adaptive, and so on and so forth. And they were all really good solutions and could be very good solutions for certain companies. Our initial basic problem was that we were on an old version of our ERP system, and our chart of accounts was all messed up and had different chart of accounts for different types of the businesses. So to do, really quick consolidations and things like that, and then to up and download that through the ERP environment, just proved to be a nightmare. So we actually, to be honest, although we looked at these things, we did trials on these things, it always went back to Excel. And so Excel, if you get into like Power Excel, and you get some people that really know what they're doing with it, can be a good solution, even for like a mid-sized company. But I think that once you get into really large companies, they're really looking in the sort of the Oracle type environments, if they're working in SAP and so on. But it really depends that the size of the company, I think, as to what sort of software needs you really do need. And I think that we supplemented Excel with Power BI, and with the apps that we've developed in Power BI. I think that fitted in very well. Our ERP was a Microsoft ERP Dynamics. So, the whole Microsoft suite of Office System 365, Dynamics, and Power BI all kind of rolled in pretty well for us, and made it easy for people to work with. But I can understand that different size companies, or depending on where what type of organization you're in, what type of industry you're in, could possibly dictate other solutions.
Cool. No, it sounds great. So talking about AI a bit, you mentioned it a little bit earlier. Do you think, firstly, do you think AI will ever take our jobs in FP&A? And secondly, have you ever seen AI being used successfully in applications in FP&A? Or even
Yeah, I think there are certain applications that are easier to use. So, for example, we used it in our cash flow forecasting. It was a base of Excel, but we used AI to basically project receipts, and so we could model our receipt patterns pretty well through using AI, and just feeding that into the Excel by day, because we would forecast out 3 to 6 months by day in our cash flow forecasting, and that would be a real nightmare to do it manually. But with basically a fairly simple AI input, we were able to do it very quickly and update it very quickly as well. And I think that from a we would update it weekly, even though, you know, so that parameter would just be updated, and you'd see that the current things wouldn't really change, but your outliers over the next few months might change a little bit. As far as the payment side of things, it was easier for us to do more manually because we knew what the payment patterns were in terms of like with payroll and tax payments and that kind of thing. We knew what that was, and of course, depending on your actual AP payments, were going to be somewhat constrained by what your cash availability was anyway. We tried to do some AI in production planning. And there again, that's an area where I think operational planning and production planning could work very well with AI, because you're kind of doing a repetitive kind of thing over time, and you can pull strings one way or the other in terms of making the fine adjustments that you needed to filter the data. But I think the overall, like, you know, operating plan and 5-year plan and things like that are probably a little bit way off. Well, would be for us anyway. I don't know. Other people might say, oh, we're already doing it. But I would say that's more difficult to do. But I'm not saying it's not going to happen. As I was saying earlier, you know, we've only had the smartphone for 12 years or whatever. What's it going to be like in another 10 years from now, looking at the rapid technological advancement that we're seeing in our daily lives? I mean, it wasn't so long ago that we would go to Blockbuster or Redbox or whatever and rent a DVD for the weekend, or a, you know, even a tape. But now, of course, with streaming and so on and so forth, you don't need to do any of that stuff. You know, you can do it on your phone, you can do it on your TV, you know, you can do it anywhere. So what is that all going to look like in 10 years from now? I don't know.
Yeah, very good. So we've seen a bit of a trend of FP&A leaders becoming growing into kind of the role of the CFO. Kind of, what are your thoughts on this trend?
You know, I'm kind of old school. I'm a chartered accountant out of Deloitte, and you know, in those days we didn't do remote working, and we didn't do all sorts of things that we do today. So we had to kind of show up for work, and we had to get the degrees and qualifications to support that basic qualification. And I think there again, it depends on the size of the company. I think as a CFO, I think you're going to want that person to have a good technical understanding of accounting. You're going to want that person to have a fairly good knowledge of taxation, and you know, the opportunities that tax and all the different tax opportunities that would provide that company with not having to pay too much tax unnecessarily. So with that, having said that, if you're talking about an FP&A person that comes from not a financial background, then I think that could be a stretch to be a CFO, depending on the type and nature of that company, the size of that company. But I'm not saying it's impossible. And I don't think you need to necessarily be a technical accountant to be a CFO. But I think a lot of people are relying on a CFO to have that. Let me put it another way. And I'm not sure that this analogy holds water, but I'm going with it. If you're going to go and get your leg cut off because you've got gangrene in your left leg and you need to get your leg cut off, I don't want to go to a PA to have my leg cut off. I'd rather go to a top surgeon in San Francisco or LA or somewhere like that that's done this before. You know what I mean? And specializes in cutting people's legs off. That's kind of where I would go. And I think with the CFO analogy, I would rather have, if I was the CEO of the company, I'd rather know that this guy knows what he's doing or she's doing in this company, knows the tax stuff, knows who to contact if we have a problem, knows how to deal with the banks, knows how to deal with insurance, knows how to do all these things, as opposed to the FP&A guy who might be really good at forecasting, but doesn't have the depth of some of these other aspects. So I don't know whether that really answers the question, James, because I think that it's a horses for courses thing. You know, it really depends on a lot of different factors. I think I'm seeing a lot of small companies where people that used to work in our finance department were hired out or left the company for a title, and the title was CFO. Well, this person was a general accountant, wasn't even a controller level, and so I'd have a problem with that. But there again, I can understand people leaving to go for a title and going for a bigger salary, but I think people misuse the title sometimes.
All right, that's interesting perspective. So I hear you enjoying retirement now. So congratulations.
Yeah, it's very underrated.
So after a very successful career, is there anything that you would go back and give your younger self some advice, while starting off?
Well, in my case, it would have been get your studies done as fast as possible. I didn't do that. And I chose to swan around Europe as a young guy. I came back and ran safaris in Botswana, Rhodesia, Mozambique for a while, and then when the internal war started up in Rhodesia or Zimbabwe today, I went down to South Africa and joined Deloitte, and that's when I started. But I was starting my career at Deloitte at that time, without a degree, and didn't even really know the difference between accounting and law. And I know that doesn't happen today, but it was the case back in '73. And, shortly after, I was married with young children, and having to go through as an article clerk with Deloitte, getting $80-something a month wasn't really a great solution. So I've always impressed upon my kids, I have 3 kids, to get their degrees done and don't take the gap year until you've actually got the qualification, and then go have a swan around if you want after that. So that would be one of the things that I would have done if I had my time again. And I think the other thing is, don't let geography stifle your career. And I think that, I worked for Mars in different parts of the world. I worked for Diageo in different parts of the world. And at that time, I was very willing to go wherever they wanted me to go, and when. And I'm looking at people today that are not that willing to move. They like where they live. They're going to stay there, even though there are no jobs there. And I think that could stifle your career. Maybe you get to a certain point in your life where you say, okay, fine, I'm happy with where I've got to now, and now I can kind of settle down and put some boundaries around me and so on and so forth. But I think that, I don't know, I could work in Outer Mongolia for 2 years, providing, the pay is right and it made sense, So I don't know, that's just my perspective. And I see it with my kids. My kids are moving around quite a bit. So I'm happy that they're doing that. You know.
That's great. Well, James, really appreciate all the time and sharing all your experience and knowledge. And hopefully, I hear you're looking for new board seats. So hopefully you'll continue to kind of, add value. And I wish you luck with your continued retirement.
Thank you. Yeah, appreciate it.
All
Thanks,
right.
James. Yeah,
Oh, thanks very much. We're going to stop
thank you.
stream now.